For the second part, we have Michiel Scheffer, who is president of the board of the European Innovation Council. He has 3 decades of experience in business, academia, and public policy, and he has more than 20 years of experience in the field of innovation, including on breakthrough technologies, disruptive innovations, and startup impact investment. We're very pleased to have Lisa Monaco, who is president of Microsoft Global Affairs, where she is responsible for advancing Microsoft's global policy and trust agenda. Lisa served as the 39th United States Deputy Attorney General from 2021 to 2025, and as Homeland Security Advisor under President Barack Obama. And we're also very, very pleased to have Farnam Jahanian, who is a computer scientist, an entrepreneur, a public servant, and an academic leader, currently president of Carnegie Mellon University, where he holds the Henry L. Hillman President's Chair. Voila, so that's our second panel, and let's jump right into it. And I think what we can do, Lisa, if it's okay, we'll start with you.
Sure.
So in the theme that we're developing today, as science and knowledge become increasingly digital and AI enabled, how can we protect trusted information against fraud, against manipulation, against misuse, while still preserving openness and access to the international community?
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and kudos to the Frontier Science House for hosting this discussion. One point of personal privilege, I want to say it's wonderful to be here with Farnam, because in my public service role, focusing on cybersecurity, Carnegie Mellon was a tremendous pioneer and partner to law enforcement and the public service sector. The end of the last panel was really a great lead-in to some of the things that I wanted to focus on, notably trust and transparency and collaboration. I think these are kind of the watchwords. I think of AI as the quintessential double-edged sword. Brad Smith from Microsoft wrote a book about how technology is both a tool and a weapon, and nowhere is that more true than with respect to AI, whether you're in the cyber domain, where AI is increasingly being used by attackers to enhance their effectiveness, and also by defenders to accelerate our ability to combat the global cybersecurity landscape. It's same is true vis-a-vis science, where I think it's no secret to this crowd that AI is allowing and promoting breakthroughs in areas that we never thought would be possible, even as we have to be constantly alert to the dangers of misuse and abuse. And the way I think about it is really this, the way that AI can accelerate fraud and manipulation really makes an enemy of trust in any domain that we are operating in. So how do we get after that? I think the way Microsoft thinks about it really is that we have to be very intentional about how we are undergirding, building, and preserving that trust. And that's essential to preserving openness, right? I'm the daughter of a pioneering transplant scientist and surgeon. So I'm not a scientist, but I know enough from growing up listening to my father and his research colleagues talk that the lifeblood of scientific inquiry is, frankly, disagreement, interrogation of each other's research and debate. But increasingly, I think the danger that we're confronting now is that AI-enabled and fueled fraud and manipulation really means that it's not so much about disagreement anymore, it's about deception. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get after and focus on building and preserving that trust if we are to stop the erosion of faith in science and facts. So whether it's disinformation in the election context, cybersecurity, or science, how do we do that? And I think in the most fundamental way to do it, and the way Microsoft is thinking about it, is building in trust at every stage of the systems that we are building. And so What does that mean? It means transparency. To get to the theme that was discussed at the end of the last panel. That's why we are advocating for digital nutrition labels, ways to verify the provenance of content, the way to verify and interrogate and make clear whether something has been changed, whether it's been AI generated. We want common standards for that type of verification mechanism. We are also at the same time turning the tables, quite frankly, on AI bad actors, those who would use AI to perpetrate fraud. We are turning the tables and using AI to more effectively see those patterns and detect fraudulent content, to detect patterns in phishing scams and the like. And then the last thing I'd say that we are very, very focused on, as our research shows, that the front door for all cyber-enabled fraud, including in areas of manipulation across all sectors, is compromise of identity. So we're going directly at that issue and promoting things like getting away from the password issues and promoting use of phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. So these types of tools that go at building that trust, ensuring transparency, common standards, enabling individuals and institutions to verify what those facts are, all leads to the last point, which I think is fundamentally about collaboration. And this is the most important, I think, innovation that we can bring as the private sector, working with academia, as in my past life we did with Carnegie Mellon, working with governments to combat those malicious cyber actors who are perpetrating fraud and manipulation across whether it's industry, whether it's science and academia.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And since you are leaning over to Farnham a number of times, and so I think that the natural next question is for Farnham. So we've heard a little bit about cybercrime. We've heard a little bit about digital threats. But what I'd like to hear from you, I know that in your work you're very concerned about the future of work in the age of automation and AI, and that's going to be another very, very huge impact. I think we'll have a session later this week on reskilling in the digital age. But I'd just like to hear from your point of view. What do we need to do to make sure that the new generation is going to be able to fully participate in the benefits of transformative science? How are they going to be able to operate in an ecosystem, an economic system that allows the companies, the nations to stay competitive, and just generally, how are they going to keep pace with technological development?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's good to be with you, and thank you again to Frontiers and to organizers. It's good to be with my distinguished panelists, including Lisa, with whom I've worked in the past. The question you're raising is really an important one, because I think the urgency of how we deploy emerging technologies, including AI, in various sectors of our economy and the impact of it that we're seeing, and it was articulated by our speakers at the beginning, how it's impacting scientific discovery itself, is just as urgent to worry about development of the workforce, the population can leverage this. And you're right, it has many layers to it. It's not just about educating the next generation of scientists and engineers. That's absolutely true. I'll come back to that. But I'm delighted that you're having a session about upskilling and reskilling, because it's really about developing the population such that we all can benefit from it and we can leverage that in our day-to-day work, whether it's in scientific discovery or in any sector of our economy, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in energy sector. And certainly what we have seen as AI and emerging technologies are transforming every sector of our economy. They're also transforming, as it was alluded to by Henry earlier, the scientific discovery process itself. Mm-hmm. And what a surprise, it's also transforming education. Let me elaborate on it for a moment. We need to worry about, first of all, of course, what we teach. We need to reimagine the curriculum itself. It's not about just, how do we teach computer science and AI? In fact, my colleagues at Carnegie Mellon are looking at this very issue. As we have seen this new generation of generative AI. What does that really mean to train the next generation of computer scientists and AI? In fact, we were the first university to launch an AI undergraduate degree in 2018. And imagine 6-7 years later how much the world has changed. It's also about educating the next generation of scientists and engineers to be able to take advantage of these emerging technologies, including generative AI, including the advances that we see. It's also about, in fact, integrating AI, and I'm using the word AI very broadly, into almost every discipline. And I know my colleagues from other academic institutions can attest to this. We're experimenting, piloting with bringing AI not only into science and engineering, but also in all sorts of disciplines, from philosophy to humanities to social sciences, and I think the sky is the limit. In fact, when it comes to engineering and sciences, what we've done is we have, for example, a number of programs that are developed that look at the impact of AI in various subdisciplines. So that's point number one. The point number two is that as scientific, going back to the scientific discovery process itself, as we're seeing the science becoming much more interdisciplinary, the discovery and also tackling some of the most fundamental problems facing humanity, whether it's healthcare, whether it's understanding the brain, whether it's new forms of energy or material, it requires us to have interdisciplinary teams to come together and tackle these problems. The notion of having siloed disciplinary explorations are way outdated. In fact, Henry can attest to this, I think you can attest to this as well, that in fact neuroscience is a fascinating discipline because it brings cognitive psychologists, it brings people from biology, computer scientists, computational biologists, mathematicians together to work together. And we see this over and over. So we need to continue to break down disciplinary silos to be able to tackle this. The final point that I want to make, and I'll be very brief, this is probably what's most exciting about the impact of AI on education. We've been on this journey. A number of academic institutions and researchers have been on this journey of trying to understand how people learn. I think we've made tremendous progress on that front. And I'll just put a plug in for my fellow colleagues at Carnegie Mellon who've been on the journey of understanding learning science and bringing learning science to applications. Here's in a nutshell. We're at a point where we have enough understanding of learning science such that we can make learning be much more adaptive, much more personalized, and geared to individual students. We have known this since the 1960s, that if you can give each child, each student, his or her own tutor, you can improve learning outcome by multiple standard deviation. In fact, what we're able to do is not about the role of technology just to giving access and connectivity. That's really true. In fact, someone of my generation would tell you, every 10 years we come up with a new technology and say, it's going to transform education. 30 years ago, give every child a laptop. Then we said it was network connectivity. Then it was MOOCs, not to offend anybody who has worked in MOOCs. The truth is that as a computer scientist, I can tell you, we know how to deliver bits. Access to content is not the same as learning. I think our neuroscientists in this room can attest to that. So the question is, can we use technology to improve learning outcomes? We are at the cusp of being able to do it, and being able to do it at scale, and AI is going to have a huge impact in that. Not only just into understanding how brain works, but more importantly, having technology that actually a student can use by changing the curriculum such that we continuously monitor the understanding and learning of a student, fill the gaps almost in near real time, and assist teachers to be able to fill those gaps. So two students, same age, same discipline, may learn things at very different rate and develop different gaps. I think what's exciting is that now we have the technology to be able to do this, not only for every student, but be able to do it at scale.
Thank you, Fiona. And I'd like to point out that even before MOOCs, there was the TV courses, then there was the radio courses in the 1920s. It goes back as far as you dare look, I think. Michiel, what I'd like to do in this discussion is to sort of go back to a point that we explored together in our call last week. The theme of today is open science for global challenges, and I think we all agree that scientific research is the motor of innovation. It has a direct benefit for startups. Open science is the fuel of the beginning of the research of the innovation, and even to this point, as we were talking about, the European Commission requires that the research outputs from the European Research Council, from the Horizon projects, requires open access publishing. But once it reaches the organizations that you work with, it becomes more about turning that scientific research into technology. And so there's a tension here. There's a tension that sort of is established between transformative science and the way transformative science is moved into the sphere of startups, of the economic engine. How do you deal with this dilemma?
Well, the dilemma is that we start with, let's say, funding small research projects. We call that the Pathfinder. And basically, a long problem of Europe is the relative failure of creating startups, and especially scale-ups, out of scientific knowledge, like projects like the Pathfinder. But ultimately, at the end of the Valley of Death, we want to have companies emerging and these companies scaling up. So in the beginning, we like open science and open publishing, and in the end, we want them to have patents and to have, let's say, protected knowledge, because that makes a company valuable, sellable, scalable. So there's a dilemma between the beginning and the end. But in the middle, we also fund companies not for the sake of the startup or that company, but because altogether they form an ecosystem. So they also have to share their knowledge in quantum, for example, with a supplier, a client. If they go bust, the knowledge should be transferable to another company that can take it up. So the ecosystem requires a certain level of openness, a high level of collaboration, and also, let's say, some managed protection. So there's really, let's say, we have to help companies through that dilemma from open to valuable and sellable. And that's quite a dilemma. I hope that we don't have that always. Tomorrow we will have a session here as well to see how we can also foster non-capitalistic models of entrepreneurial growth with a much more open approach to knowledge and to protecting that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. I think you pointed out also this the idea of the science being open is very much linked to the nature of this innovation ecosystem. It's very much driven by scientists and people who have done scientific degrees. I don't know if you want to talk to that point.
Well, to start with, what we see so we have about 742 companies funded. This week is an interesting one because projects are being evaluated. So by the end of the week, it will be around 800 companies funded. And we really expect from them to become either unicorns, the same color of my tie. I have a unicorn tie, met for my first trip to US, 1989. So we want to have unicorns, but also in more German terms, we want a new Mittelstand. So let's say solid companies with 200, 300 people employed that know in depth the skills they need. But overall, we want, let's say, to strengthen the European ecosystem. And that requires, again, this combination of openness and closeness. And what I hear a lot, I mean, trust is an important value. And so trust enables to share data without having NDAs, LOIs, contracts, American type, so that we can rely on civil law with relatively, say, short, let's say, contractual obligations. That's one thing. And the second thing, which is also important, especially with people with PhDs, which is the majority of our founders, that also we have to keep a relatively open labor market. That basically people who fail can succeed in joining another company or starting again without, let's say, a whole inheritance of do's and don'ts, especially don'ts.
Okay, terrific. What I'd like to do is kind of wrap up our session with just again a sort of a general question. the keywords I've picked up are collaboration and sort of breaking silos. And so I think that is the theme that I would like to suggest for just one last round of comments.
Sure. Back to the microphone. I think the world is changing, and the pace of innovation has accelerated so much, and the impact of that on the economy is so amazing that I think what we need to do is adjust our expectations to be able to essentially match the needs of society. And to be able to do it really does require us to break down these silos, have much more collaborations. One important issue that we often neglect is not about collaboration across disciplines. It's also collaboration between public and private sector. In fact, Microsoft has a terrific record of public-private partnerships. I think we need to encourage that. We need to nurture it, I think, to benefit of society and benefit of the private sector as well.
Okay, thank you, Fiona.
Thank you for the plug, but it's absolutely the case. It's actually the reason I came to Microsoft, because of my experience working on the other side as a policymaker, as a law enforcement official, working on public safety issues, particularly in the area of cybercrime, which really gets at the fundamental issues of fraud and manipulation that we were talking about. And here, that collaboration between government, between civil society, between academia and the private sector is absolutely essential. It's a game changer. What I have seen, the most impactful, the only impactful disruptions of the fraudulent ecosystem that gets at the issues you raised at the start of this, the cyber-enabled fraud that reduces faith in scientific research, et cetera. The only way we can get at malicious cyber actors, in my experience, is by pairing the intelligence and insights that are unique to the private sector when it comes to cyber threats, along with the capabilities of government and law enforcement and insights from civil society and academia. If we do not bring all of that together and act as a holistic kind of engine to address those threats, we will not be able to meet pace, keep pace with the cyber threat that we're seeing, which really is the enemy to the trust that we've all talked is so needed. So collaboration between and among government, private sector, civil society, and academia is the essential ingredient to our ability to build and preserve that trust that's so necessary.
Okay, Lisa, very happy to hear that the theme resonated so strongly. Michiel, how does this theme resonate with you?
Well, being the only European in the panel, Europe is a continent with 27 countries, most of them small and some thinking they're slightly larger. But cooperation and trust is essential to have European working. So what is, especially these days, quite challenging is that while we have to increase the level of trust and cooperation inside Europe, the world has become a nastier place. And this time I was bought in the US, and I went 14 times afterwards. And my wife did a bachelor degree and a PhD and 2 sabbaticals. I would love a world where we can openly work also across the Atlantic and keep that way, and not having to invest in all kind of stuff because, well, we have to be sovereign. But it's an important dilemma. And unfortunately, I think the world will make nasty choices, starting this week in Davos, but also the next week. So it's also a matter of how do we keep that trust working, because trust, it's a bit like AI. It's so trust is so much cheaper than finding mechanism of control.
I'm going to send a new tie to Michiel.
Okay.
I have 300. Thank you.
Terrific. Let's have a round of applause for the panelists, please. And,